everybody to our online panel event, Empowered Cycles, Menstrual Mastery and Secrets to Success in 2025. Thank you to everyone who had signed up last year for this. We had a couple of misfortunes, but here we are, and we hope that you get a lot from this session. I'll kind of give you kind of a rough outline of how the next kind of hour to an hour and a half is going to go. We have three wonderful panelists with us who will each talk a little bit about their expertise in the field of menstruality and the menstrual cycle. We'll then have a space for Q&As, questions and answers. We've got a couple of questions which have come in from people that can't join us live, so we'll be answering those. And then we might just kind of wrap up with a just general discussion about our menstrual cycle and menstruality, and then we'll draw that to a close. So as I said, I'm really excited that we've got three wonderful experts in the field. We've got Isobel Ripley, who is a fertility awareness educator and fertility awareness method mastery practitioner. We've got Jess Kasriel, who is a women's health nutritionist, and she'll be looking at how food can support our hormones and ease our PMS. And then we have Lisa Higgins, who is a menstruality coach, and Lisa will be talking more about what menstruality actually is and how she can support you with her knowledge and wisdom. So we will start with you, Izzy. Do you want to kind of explain what you exactly mean by kind of fertility awareness educator? What does that mean for people?
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be chatting about this. So a fertility awareness educator is someone who can teach and share the fertility awareness method, which is actually not one method. It's an umbrella term for many different methods of essentially identifying your fertile phase and your infertile phase of every menstrual cycle so that you can either avoid pregnancy or conceive, but also these methods give us a very deep understanding of what's going on hormonally throughout our whole cycle so that we can understand if there's something going on at the root, causing us to have symptoms, causing us to have cycle conditions. And we can use this information that we can gather literally from our body, which is giving us signals every day about our fertility and our hormones, but which can be subtle until you actually tune into them. And using these signs, we can build that bigger picture of our health, which in turn helps us understand our mental health and also our spiritual health as well. And I think of the menstrual cycle as really like it's our creative essence. And that's how it's spoken about in Chinese medicine as well. Our reproductive health is so linked to our overall well-being and vitality. So that's what I teach. And then the fertility awareness method mastery practitioner, which is quite a mouthful, that is about so when I started teaching FAM, I noticed that people were coming to me and saying, I'd really love to learn this and do this method, but I have endometriosis, or I think I have PCOS, or I've got really irregular cycles, and will this work for me? And I knew that it would work for them, but I also felt quite underexperienced in dealing with cycles that weren't kind of textbook. And honestly, that's most people's cycles. So I decided to work with Lisa Hendrickson-Jack, who's the author of The Fifth Vital Sign, which is a really amazing book. And she's developed this way of working with the symptothermal method of fertility awareness so that you, as I was speaking about, so that you can use it as a way of understanding what's going on with your hormones. And really working with something like PCOS, or even when you've got missing periods and you're not sure where your periods are, you can actually use FAM, strangely enough, even though you would think, I'm not having a period, so that means I can't track anything. You can actually really use FAM as an amazing tool to support you in that healing journey.
What kind of led you down this path? Like, why this in particular?
So my own journey, as it normally is, very horrible experiences with hormonal birth control from about age 15. I kind of tried everything. And I thought of myself as quite an expert in contraception at that time because I actually was an actor for student doctor exams. So I would go and do scenarios with them when I was 15. And my favorite one was where I was a 16-year-old girl coming to the doctor needing contraception. And I mean, the doctor's role and the way that they would pass their test was to um, essentially not let me leave without giving me the depot shot. I mean, giving me the depot shot. Um, yeah, which is the whole thing of itself. But at the time, what I got from that little job that I used to do was that I would sit there and hear them, hear multiple doctors telling me all the options and, you know, I felt like I was this expert in in contraception at that time. So when I wanted that for myself, it was actually I felt quite empowered in the experience of going to my doctor and asking for what I wanted and knowing what I wanted. But unfortunately, none of them felt good in my body and like a range of side effects from like pelvic pain nearly every day to just the kind of general sense of like, this isn't right. So quite a variety of things. Um, and so when I was actually can barely remember like the timeline of this, but I think early 20s, I just said, I can't do any of this anymore. Not knowing anything about FAM at the time. Um, I was lucky enough to read the book Period Power, which I think a lot of people know by Maisie Hill, and I think has done such a good job of popularizing cycle awareness. And in that book, she talks about FAM. And so I just grabbed onto that. And through that, charting, tracking my cycles, just learning so much about myself and also realizing that so for a long time, I thought I had bipolar when I was a teenager. Realizing, oh, it's PMS. It's not, it's not bipolar. And that was, yeah, a massive revelation. Um, and so, yeah, through that, got into the work of Red School, which I'm sure Lisa's going to speak about, and um, menstruality. And then I started teaching and sharing, or sharing really, not teaching, but sharing around menstruality and the cycle seasons and how that had supported me with quite severe PMS. Um, but then I realized that there were some things that like there were basic gaps in education that I wanted to talk about in those sessions. And I just couldn't like it, for instance, like even just basic understanding of like what is ovulation and does it happen once in your cycle or does it happen multiple times? Um, and just like these physiological realities that I just found that I found myself much more drawn to sharing around that actual concrete part, the physicality of the cycle. So that's when I decided to get the FAM educator training.
And you talk about kind of thinking that you had bipolar in your teenage years. And what were the kind of healthcare professionals saying around that? Was that something you were presenting to them as well, or were you keeping that kind of a little bit hidden because you didn't want to talk about it, or?
Um, I I never it wasn't really in my family. culture to go to a doctor around mental health stuff. So yeah, and I'm quite glad actually because I think it could have definitely have led me down a path of medication, and I think that's really not what I would have needed at the time. Um, and so I just yeah, I was just with it, and I remember I applied to do a master's after graduating from uni. And it was then that I was like, oh, actually, I need to maybe see someone about this because how am I gonna do this master's when I'm like going through these massive waves of energy and emotion? And by that time, I had figured out, okay, it's related to my cycle, and I did go to a doctor about that, but they were quite dismissive. They were like, oh, it's bad PMS, and I can write you a note, but yeah, that was as far as it went.
Not really offering you any practical support about how you might be able to navigate
No,
that cycle.
no.
Okay.
But I suppose I didn't necessarily ask them for that. I was I've always been a bit like standoffish with doctors or like coming into the situation like very clear in what I want and not very open to their suggestions. So I came in saying, I'm doing a master's and I don't know how I'm going to cope, so I need you to like say I have something so I can get support from the uni, or it was more like that. But yeah. Um I decided not to pursue diagnosis around something like PMDD, because yeah, I didn't think it was as severe as PMDD. I think it was, yeah, I could manage it. Like some cycles, it wouldn't be so bad. And yeah,
Okay. I
I
think
figured
we're going to talk a little bit more about PMDD
that.
with Lisa and what it is specifically. So
Yeah.
we'll explore that a little bit more further down the line. I'm curious regarding fertility awareness method. Why do you think someone should choose this method of contraception or of actually trying to conceive over first of all, over this is kind of a two-pronged question. First of all, over kind of hormonal contraception. And secondly, it's not, people might think, oh, that's the app, isn't it? I just need to check the app. But this is different as well. And I think we need to draw that distinction. So let's start with the first kind of question, as in kind of why this over hormonal contraception? And then let's move on to how it differs from just having an app on your phone.
Mm. So, you know, it's going to be a myriad of different reasons for different people and the choices that you make. But I always bring it down to with FAM, you get to maintain the integrity of your menstrual cycle. And that to someone who has not experienced positivity around having a cycle would feel like, you know, well, why do I need to have this thing? It's a burden, gets in the way. But when you've actually experienced the gifts that it can bring to have that cyclicality and that um the powers and the gifts and the lessons of riding your cycle time after time, um, it suddenly just becomes unthinkable to want to shut that down, which hormonal birth control does shut that down. So um, that sense of cyclicality, obviously, it's all around us in the world. Like nature is cyclical, so experience the moon cycles, we experience the seasonal cycles. So even if you don't have a menstrual cycle, you are still under the influence of cyclicality. But when you are taking hormonal birth control, you are suppressing that cyclicality that is inherent in your body. Um, and even the copper coil, to some extent, although it's not hormonal, um, what it can do is actually suppress your cycle anyway um, through how it can affect your hormones through the sort of stress of having something inserted in your uterus. Um, yeah. So it's just such a completely different paradigm, being able to maintain that menstrual cycle or not having that cycle. And I think, yeah, I guess what we're speaking about today is like, well, why would you want to have a cycle? What is so good about having that? Um, and for me, it's like it's everything. It's my complete anchor to myself, to the universe or God, whatever you want to call it, that kind of bigger picture, nature, um, and my creativity. And I just can't now imagine not having that, even though I do still experience big lows and, those waves. Um, it's so valuable to me. Uh, and then, yeah, the question of I'm so passionate about this like difference between apps and fertility awareness. So apps which you input some data, so you'll input your basal body temperature. And then the app will give you a prediction of when your fertile phase probably is. And it tends to give you like green days or red days if you're avoiding pregnancy, and then, the other way around if you're trying to conceive. Uh, Fertility awareness is the the actual understanding and the knowing of those green days and red days for yourself. And it's a self-reliance in a way that the app doesn't offer, because the app is, I mean, the app, I'm saying, like, for example, something like Natural Cycles. Um, and yeah, there's a big difference, I feel, between relying those on those algorithms and predictions, um, and actually reading your own body to understand those things and understand what's going on. Um, yeah. And like to me, it feels there's a similar energetics of kind of relying on an app to predict things for you as there is to taking hormonal birth control, for instance, because you're still relying on something external to you. Whereas with fertility awareness, the big key thing is the cervical mucus. This is one of our main signs of fertility. And no app that better than you, or can look at those things, feel them with your hands and read them. So it's a completely different thing.
I think it's just hearing you talk there reminded me of a phrase I heard, and unfortunately, I cannot remember who this was from, but essentially saying being on the pill is female castration. And that just hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, yeah, it is. It's chemical castration. And I've only kind of came to that
Mm.
in the last couple of years. And I was just blown away by that just simple phrase, and how much it can change you. I think a lot of people are on the pill, as I was on the pill before having my kids. I was on a pill where I was still bleeding. And so in my head, I was still having a cycle, as in like, oh, this is still my natural body doing its thing. And I didn't actually realize, and it sounds mad now, but I didn't actually realize that's not what was happening. And it was just the affectation
Mm.
of having a menstrual cycle, but I wasn't actually having a menstrual cycle. I was just bleeding monthly. Um, and it wasn't actually until post kids, because I think like a lot of people, I became kind of sexually active when I was about 15, so went on the pill quite quickly, as in like I'm not becoming pregnant, kind of get on the pill. Kind of had a series of monogamous relationships, so I carried on being on the pill and didn't come off the pill until I decided, well, actually I do want kids. So being on the pill for almost 20 years, and therefore not actually understanding and knowing my cycle until I stopped breastfeeding my youngest child. So at that point, I was about 39, 40. And to have that whole length of time not actually realizing what my cycle was and how it affected me was actually quite scary. And as I said, I was kind of in this safety net of thinking, oh, I was having my period when I wasn't. And I'm curious, I know you've picked up on this story as well, Izzy. There was a story fairly recently about how more and more people, more and more women are ditching kind of hormonal contraception. Can you pull out any kind of information from that? Because like, again, off the top of my head, I can't remember what the article was saying, but kind of why people are kind of leaving hormonal contraception behind. What's the kind of drive behind that?
Yeah, I think there's been so much information come out around um, side effects and um, yeah, and that kind of that feeling of outrage that it can give you at that word, like you when you say chemical castration, and the fact that it's so not spoken about, that's what it is. And I think many women feel just really, um, yeah, really angry about the lack of really informed consent around these things, and just being told this is your only option, being told that you're irresponsible if you're not on it. Or for instance, a lot of women go on it for symptoms that they're experiencing, like acne or painful periods, and then learn in later life, well, actually, it's not a cure, it's not a medicine for that, and just feel really let down. Um, and and then even on a subtle level, I think there's this awareness. A lot of women who come to me who want to come off the pill say like, well, it worked for me. I felt fine. I didn't have side effects, but I just feel like I want to know who I am without it.
Mm.
And I feel like I want to trust my emotions as being me and not being this thing that I'm taking. So it's kind of this building awareness of, oh, yeah, we're all actually taking huge amounts of medication every day. And what does that mean? I remember when I would have to sign a form when I was on the pill, and it would be like, are you taking any medication? I'd say no, because I didn't even think of it as a drug, but it is. Um,
And many forms now, actually, I'm just thinking kind of the form you need to fill in when you give blood and stuff. They say any medication excluding hormonal contraception. Again, even within in the societal kind of thing, it's like, oh no, it's not medication, but
yeah,
it is.
yeah, yeah, and I think this awakening to the the power of cyclicality and the desire to connect with that part of ourselves that is nature, and that is this this wild part of ourselves that we can draw so much um inspiration and power from, and just this desire to really, yeah, connect with that cyclicality.
I think that's a lovely place to leave this part of the panel discussion. We will come back to you, Izzy, because we're going to do it towards the end. We're going to do kind of a one takeaway point that you'd like to kind of offer to the audience. So we'll come back to you in a moment. But thank you so much, and thank you for giving us your wisdom and your knowledge regarding fertility awareness. Method. My mind went blank there. Word is it? But yeah, and again at the end of this discussion, we'll talk about how people can find out more. And I know that all three of you have events coming up, online events, which I'm really excited about. So thank you so much, Izzy. I really appreciate your time today. Jess, hello, Jess. So just to remind people, you're a women's health nutritionist, and you want to we're going to focus on kind of how food can support our hormones and ease PMS. Do you want to kind of give us a little bit of a taste about what that means, and then also similar question to how what I asked Izzy, is what led you to this path, and what brought you to kind of become a women's nutritionist?
Yeah. So in terms of, who I mainly work with in my private practice is women who want help with their hormones, whether it's, teenagers to, women in their 20s and wanting, like, Izzy's talking about, coming off contraception and working on balancing or just balancing hormones for different symptoms like the PMS or not having their periods. And also, I work with women who want to try and get pregnant, and supporting them if they've been trying for a long time, or having IVF and want nutritional support as well with that. I also work with women with eating disorders and disordered eating, and that was my primary work. And I still and sometimes there is a little bit of a crossover. But yes, really why the reason I kind of got into the work I'm doing today is definitely a lot to do with my personal story. And so I have PCOS, which for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's polycystic ovary syndrome. It's relatively common. I think at least 1 in 10 women have it today. And so growing up, I was a professional tennis player. And at the age of 14, I was diagnosed with PCOS. And the reason it was so quite early and sort of caught out quite early was my dad had quite a good awareness of it because he's a nutritional therapist himself. And my mum, has PCOS and things. And I was, despite training so many hours and things, I was actually gaining weight and I had excess hair and, all these different symptoms. And so actually getting that diagnosis quite young, I would say was helpful. I also had, I was told, may not have children growing up, which kind of just got lodged at the back of my brain. Even, I didn't really know if I wanted children. Obviously, at the age of 14, it's not really on your mind. I just wanted to be a tennis player. But it was definitely, when it came towards that time of wanting to try it, it was definitely like, oh, will I be able to get pregnant? But yeah, through sort of, kind of a long story short, really, is when through that diagnosis, through also trying to certain things with coaches trying to put me on diets and things, I did end up having an eating disorder myself, and through that I did lose my periods for quite a while playing tennis. And the transition, like when Izzy was talking about, actually embracing a menstrual cycle today and actually it being so linked with creativity and knowing yourself. And I mean, that is definitely the place I am now today. But back then I was really quite happy not having my periods. It was like something not to think about, obviously it was just a whole disconnect and for my body. And yeah, I quite enjoyed that. And then eventually when I found recovery, and decided I wanted, to follow my passion of nutrition. It was really through learning about nutrition that I started to kind of see, making changes myself and focusing on, protein and the healthy fats and things for PCOS, but also just, for hormone regulation and things. I just noticed a huge change in my moods, PMS, I really struggled with as well. So when I got my periods back, they were very heavy, very painful. On the first day, usually would take a lot of pain relief and, be in bed for a lot of the day. So, I thought, oh, maybe this is sort of normal, how it is. But then once I learned also the knowledge around the contraceptive pill, because I also was on that for a couple of years, I realized that actually, adding those extra hormones, external hormones, the extra estrogen on top of having a high estrogen condition is, putting so much strain on my liver and gut health. You also think about like your gut microbiome when it comes to taking the pill regularly. It does really upset it. You often, I definitely suffered a lot of bloating that, again, I just thought was normal, but it really wasn't. And, things like you can have something we call dysbiosis, where it's, you really upset the microbiome. So I think, applying that knowledge really, and then on another layer of it, when I really started to get more in touch with myself, I found I stumbled across the book In the Flow by Isobel Ripley, and very similar to what Izzy was talking. It was all about working with your cycle and the seasons of the cycle. It talked about the infradian rhythm, which we all menstruating women have, of the menstruating age. Not, it doesn't matter if you're not menstruating, but that we have not only the circadian rhythm, which everyone has, so men, women, kids, everyone, but we also have this second cycle, which is the infradian, which is the natural monthly cycle, and it has a rhythm to it. And once I started to apply that, she talks about the food, how you can adjust that over the cycle, your exercise, and that was a big one for me, actually, the exercise especially, because I was so, with all the tennis training I did, I often wanted to do the hit, all the cycle and, running and things, but actually realizing it wasn't doing my body any favors, and I was actually really working against my body. So that was a huge revelation for me. And then eventually, when we had our child, Sienna, a few years ago, and I think before, so I had more than I think 15 years of working on sort of my diet and health and things, and so we did, which was a blessing. We got pregnant quite quickly. But actually, it was after having Sienna that I realised this is, such a joy and such a blessing to be a mum, and that I realised this is a new passion, something I really want to help women to be able to conceive, and especially because infertility and issues with trying it is sort of increasing with lots of reasons, but just hearing a lot of my friends really struggling, things like that, and I started to realize, actually I want to pivot a bit more towards that, and help women, trying to get pregnant as well. So so that sort of brings me today. I guess I missed out also, a lot of my journey was healing as well, with training in Reiki and shamanism and things to kind of have that whole approach, the spiritual approach as well, which I try to bring into my clinic and client work.
Thanks, Jess. So a couple of things that I kind of picked up on there, and again, you picked up on it as well. Kind of like at one point, your period actually stopped, and at that point in your life, you're like, oh, brilliant. And I think a lot of women would have that opinion. I said, oh, great, I don't have to contend with that. Could you kind of give us some knowledge around why not having your period is not a good thing for your overall health? Like why is it detrimental to our health?
Yeah, definitely. So it's so actually what not having a period can do is it can have an effect on your bone health, particularly. So that's something when we're not producing generally enough estrogen to be having a period, then it can start to have an effect on our bones. So I see it quite often in my eating disorder clinic where if they have been anorexic for a while and aren't having periods, that actually, usually we do need to go down like the DEXA scanned sort of bone health route just to kind of see how it is, because it long term that's something to keep an eye on, because then actually if you end up having osteoporosis, it's really hard to sort of obviously deal with, and there's certain restrictions with exercise, and you have to be careful obviously with breaking fracturing your bones and things, and it's just not a nice place to be in. So yeah, it's that I would say that's the main one to be aware of with women. But yeah, and I think really the other big one is what Izzy was talking about as well, is just sort of that real disconnection to from your intuition and your cycle, and your well-being. Yeah, it's I mean, that I think that is probably why I also really enjoyed it in a way, was because there is something around trying to like disown being a woman, and I think yeah, being scared of what I guess what that attracts. And yeah, I read a book called Eating in the Light of the Moon. So that was in my early days of recovery, and she talks about the power of having your cycle and being a woman and being in your power. Yeah, I think it really hit home, that book, around how actually that's what I was avoiding. I was scared of like my light and everything, um and sexuality, and things like that. So yeah.
I think, yeah, I think I've definitely concur with that kind of almost trying to forget that we're women, and because we have to not contend with this stuff, but it means that we kind of in the world that we live in, it's not necessarily honored as it should. Kind of the fact that we are different, we're equal but different, and I think at some point within our kind of feminist evolution at some points in that journey, it was very much, well, we're equal to men and therefore we're trying to emulate being a man. And I
Yeah.
think we're kind of realizing now actually that's maybe not such a good thing. And this actually ties quite nicely in with kind of the whole pill revolution in the 60s as well, and this whole thing about feminism and taking control by going on the pill, and losing our periods in that way. And I think now we've kind of sitting back and thinking, okay, so that period of time was definitely needed, but we're coming out into a different era now, and a different time where actually no, we can be women and we can like kind of shout it from the rooftops and acknowledge our differences and celebrate our differences. And
Yeah.
I think that's very much kind of coming through now with kind of the Me Too movement, and what we're experiencing now.
Yeah.
I was curious about kind of osteoporosis, and I think most people would associate that with like an someone in their more advanced years getting that. But can that actually come on a lot earlier if you are missing your periods? Can it kind of come in your 30s and 40s? Is that possible?
Yeah, I've had a client, she was 22 and she has osteoporosis.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean she was probably anorexic for on and off for 10 years. So it was a long term thing, but yeah, definitely you can have it young. And she was also very sporty. She was an athlete growing up, and so that was really having that diagnosis for her was so difficult because of how much joy being active for her. So she had to be very careful in terms of like even, you know, what's it, you know, sort of trekking, or I don't, what's the word, but you know, because in case she falls, or so it really did start to affect her life and such a young age. Yeah, no, so it can, yeah.
really affect you that young. That's yeah, and I because I don't think people actually realize how quickly that can actually take effect on your overall health. Another thing I picked up on, which I'm really interested to know a little bit more about, you're talking about kind of exercise and
Mm.
our menstrual cycles, and how certain exercises are easier, or it's better to do certain exercises at certain times of our cycle. Could you talk a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of an easy way of sort of visualizing the cycle is the season. So your menstrual cycle, you know, being the winter, and then your follicular phase, you know, being your spring ovulatory
What so
phase.
what is your funicular phase? Like, can we talk through
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. So obviously your menstrual phase is when you have your period, and then your follicular phase is when your hormones, you know, they start to rise, and you're starting to produce, you know, the follicles ready for ovulation, and obviously ovulation is where you releasing the egg, and then we have the luteal phase, so that's you know, the 2 weeks leading up, or roughly 2 weeks leading up to your period, where your progesterone starts to rise and your estrogen starts to fall a bit. But yeah, it's either you're getting ready to potentially get pregnant or to have your period. And so those are the kind of the four phases and the four seasons. So the ovulatory being your summer, and then luteal phase being the like autumn. So almost energy wise, you know, it's a quite easy way to think about in terms of exercise. So, you know, generally it's, you know, it works really good for your body. So obviously the menstrual cycle is more about resting, you know, is about going inwards and reflecting. So yin yoga, even if you wanted to do something, or, you know, very gentle yoga, that sort of things, or walking. And then the follicular phase is when, if you think about the spring, you have a little bit more energy after your period generally. And you know, that's where you may want to, you know, do something a little bit more energetic, or yeah, if you like running, or the HIIT and things, sort of the follicular and ovulatory phase are the best ones to do that in. And it's also the best one to, if you want to try and get through like your PB, if you are sort of more into your sports, or if you do weights and things, you can, you know, it's a good time to go a bit heavier, and where your body's more like, you know, it's more adapted in those phases to put down muscle. So it's a good time to, you know, you feel like you have more energy as well for those things in general. And then the luteal phase is is more, again, going more towards the gentler exercise, less high impact, you know, so more maybe the Pilates or yoga. And sometimes it can be quite a long phase. So it can be obviously, you know, the first part of that luteal phase, you can still maybe do a little bit more intensity, but then, you know, generally a week towards your period, you really want to be slowing down, um, and doing sort of, yeah, the yoga and Pilates, which it that will support your hormones. Your body will actually favor that sort of metabolically, rather than if you're trying to like push the whole way through, or push on your menstrual cycle. Sometimes it can actually, yeah, sort of, that's where sometimes they're even causing the more bloating, on, you know, water retention, or higher PMS, you know, things like that, because, you know, that our hormones aren't favoring it. Um,
I'm
yeah.
quite kind of heartened to see that more and more professional athletes and teams like women's football and stuff are kind of listening more to how our menstrual cycles can impact health, and aren't, I know, kind of backing kind of the 80s through to the 90s, it was almost like a badge of honor if your period had stopped, because you could keep going and keep doing things. That was kind of the rationale behind it. But we've now reached a stage where coaches are realizing that they can work with the power of their athletes' menstrual cycle, and teams are realizing in terms of training and stuff like that, kind of they are incorporating that within the training programs for individual athletes and for teams as well. And I think that's a very really positive thing, that it's not kind of pushing down the period, but bringing them up. So Izzy, was that a hand up? Are you?
Can I
Lovely.
just add, I went to a webinar with I can't remember her name, but she's the coach for the, I'm gonna probably say this wrong, Golden State Warriors or some American football team. Um, she's a big deal anyway, and she also works with a lot of women. And she said something which stuck with me, which was, "You're not gonna get first place if you don't have a period." And like I'd not heard that from someone who's like coaching high top end athletes. And I can imagine that really like sinking in for people who are in that world, and just for anyone really. It's like, and I know it's not all about winning, but yeah, just puts it in perspective.
And it does. And I think obviously coaches are realizing how much responsibility they have for the health of their athletes. And that's not just in the time that they're training with them, but kind of their subsequent health going forward. I think there's a realization now, actually, I'm responsible for the health of this person. That is a human being. That isn't kind of, as you were saying, kind of robotic, right? First, like at all costs kind of thing. It's, yeah, as I said, it's very heartening to see. Jess, thank you so much. As with Izzy, we'll come back towards the end and have like there's kind of one kind of takeaway. I'd like to reintroduce Lisa Higgins, who's but you're Lisa Rebel. I love that on your little, on your little name ident. Just to head up, you do have a heavy cold, so we will forgive any coughing or spluttering. But thank you so much for being with us today, Lisa. And again, I think menstruality, it sounds like a word we should know because it sounds so familiar to other words, but a lot of people don't know what that is and what a menstruality coach is. So again, if you could kind of navigate us through that and then talk a little bit about kind of what brought you to this world, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm a bit croaky. Sorry about that, everyone. Um, yeah, so menstruality is really tapping into our own wisdom that's already there, really, within our bodies. Like, it sounds like something that's kind of, out of reach, the fact that we haven't really heard about this term. But really, all it is just coming back into our cyclical knowledge and our cyclical wisdom that's all held together within our own menstrual cycles. It is really about learning. So menstruality obviously sounds a bit like spirituality. Really, it's engaging with the psycho-spiritual energetics of the menstrual cycle. And what that really means is looking at the cycle as more than just the biological process that happens, looking at it from a perspective of how much it affects our emotional body and how much it can affect, as Izzy said, like the creative side of things, creative side of life, but also, who you are as a person, what makes you tick, what kind of aspects of life are kind of moving through you, and how you can find some amazing tools for like, looking at your life purpose or optimizing your life, or and it really does touch on everything. So it's not just about, your physical health, it's your emotional health, it's even your spiritual health. And it really is something that I'm so passionate about everybody knowing about their own menstruality and coming into that relationship with their cycles in this way. No matter what your experience currently is, there's something in there for everybody. And for me personally, it was absolutely vital for my healing of PMDD, which I had for quite a long time during my 20s and 30s. So I noticed, like, when I was in my mid-20s that I was getting PMS that was affecting me more than just sort of, feeling a bit teary or a bit kind of unsettled. This was sort of more being unable to stop the tears and feeling so anxious that I felt like I couldn't function on those few days before. It would be really bad, like particularly the day before my cycle, to the point where I would kind of get these sort of intrusive suicidal thoughts as well. And at the time, I went to the doctors. I was probably about 25 at the time, and I guess, well, that was like 15 years ago. So the kind of approach then was really, nobody even knew about PMDD. It wasn't even a term that was used at the doctors. I think they just wrote it down as premenstrual anxiety or anxiety before period. And then I went on to take antidepressants from that time, and that was really useful for me. And it's something that I'm always say that I'm not anti-medication, because I think that these things can really help with, in combination with everything. But the thing that always stuck with me was that there was never any forward plan. It was very much kind of like, deal with the symptom, come back in 3 months. And even at that time, I was like, well, if this is something that's part of my menstrual cycle, and I kind of had the view that my cycle was sort of broken and something was going wrong with it for me to feel so bad, then what, like, that's a hell of a long time before I would reach menopause to be on medication. And if that's the kind of, if that was their approach and that solution was there, then fine. But it was the fact that there was never really an actual conversation about that. There was never really a forward, just no engagement of that fact that it would be quite a long time. It was just kind of like, oh, well, if it's working now, just, keep coming back for your reviews and that kind of thing. So I just journeyed on with that and felt a lot better. And then fast forward to about sort of 5-6 years, and longer than that actually, about 8 years, I decided to come off them, as I was really interested in sitting with plant medicine. And to have ayahuasca, you need to be off everything, especially SSRIs, because they can be really counterproductive and actually be quite, like, seriously not a good combo. So anyway, I kind of bit the bullet and thought, I'll see how the land lies now. Do I even have that? Like, it was a long time ago. And to cut a long story short, I kind of ended up then at the same time moving across the world and had a big life change. And my symptoms came back really strong. And I remember, being in this, I'd moved to Indonesia, I had this beautiful house with a swimming pool. We were living this like incredible life through my husband's work. And I just remember looking at this swimming pool and thinking, like, having these flash intrusive thoughts that I should just drown myself. And it was obviously terrifying at the time. And I didn't want to I was in a bit of a tricky position because of where I was. Mental health is not something that's very, it's just not the same thing in Indonesia as it is over here. So even just finding any resources was difficult. I didn't want to just also go back onto medication if there was another way. So at the same time, I started looking around and I started looking at PMDD and what even was this and what's the sort of current, what's around there now. And that's when I came across the Red School and their book, Wild Power. And I got that book just before we moved, and I read it. I remember just sitting there and like devoured the whole thing really quickly. And oh my God, it was like the biggest light bulb moment, I guess, of my life. And it was just what they'd specifically written and referenced these terrifying intrusive thoughts, these suicidal thoughts in the book. And they'd said how women who are high sensitives or who have got, have been through some trauma in their life, or, there was a few other reasons, could experience their cycle in this way. And it was just the first time that it'd been kind of recognised, that extreme feeling that I was feeling. And actually the whole of that book and the whole of, the Red School's approach. And I should add that after I did that, I went on to train with them for a year, because I was just like, oh my God, I need to get more of this. And I was also at a bit of a career crossroads and was doing a diploma in counselling, and it kind of all just serendipitously happened where I went onto their training program for a year, which was life-changing and changed my cycle. And as soon as I started to engage with my cycle in this way and learn about this sort of this education and this new way of living, which is turning towards a more cyclical life and changing my lifestyle to suit that, my symptoms just disappeared. And it was just so profound, and it really felt like someone had just sort of reached out and sort of give me a real hand to hold, and, you know, sort of like save my life in a lot of ways, because it, and it, the real crux of it is that it just normalized everything. So what I learned particularly about that time of my life is that when you're in this huge period of change, your cycle will be reflecting that. So if you are somebody that is a high sensitive or prone to anxiety, or the way that we actually look at it now in menstruality is that if you're somebody that has those kind of more severe PMS into PMDD territory, we actually see it as a sign of real high intuition and high, like, very powerful person. And actually what's going on with that extreme sensitivity and that extreme emotion is, in the same way that highly sensitive people are the same, is actually just a lot of energy and a lot of power in there. And being able to sort of work with myself in that way just gave me validation and understanding and compassion, but it also helped me to I guess understand that those when it was happening so strongly at that time in my life, I'd just gone through this huge life change. So I was, even though I was in this beautiful place and had this really like lucky experience, it was quite a lonely experience. My husband was out at work all day. I just literally left like a job, a house, all my family, all my friends, and moved to the other side of the world. And we call it when you're in a void. So when you're in a void space in your life, that is when your symptoms can kind of really ramp up a bit. So I always kind of say that with clients that, you know, whatever's going on in their life, and usually when people come to me, they are in a bit of a turbulent place in their life as well. And yeah, again, it's sort of like working with that and seeing how this actually, your cycle really is just communicating to you about this, and seeing your cycle as an ally and as this kind of guide within you that's sort of giving you that communication it's just life-changing, because it's like not against you, and it's not something that's broken. And actually I've kind of realized that actually through that sensitivity it sort of brought me to this work. And I do believe, and every client that I do see that comes to me and says they have severe PMS or PMDD and they just feel completely lost and like they're losing grip on their whole lives and all of that, it usually, like within a few sessions, I can see that they also have this high sensitivity and this high intuition, and they're actually usually really creative people, really empathic people. And sometimes it's not even your own sensitivity that you're holding. It could be like the environment that you're in at the minute, or what you're absorbing around you, that's sort of ramping up those symptoms. And again, it sort of just gives you that context so that you're not fighting yourself anymore, and you're not kind of scared of what's happening. You're kind of like, right, okay, this is happening. How do I need to change my life now to suit this? And by engaging with menstruality, this sort of magical process happens where things do dissipate and you kind of become more empowered, more able to read your body, able to sort of read what's happening, put like boundaries in place. And it just makes that whole premenstrual time just way easier to deal with.
So I'm kind of thinking of people that are suffering with PMDD at the moment, and perhaps haven't found the support they wanted or needed from kind of allopathic medicine, so going to the GP, or have found kind of a GP which said, well, this is the symptom, you're obviously depressed, let's put you on antidepressants. But as you said, that's tackling the symptom and not the kind of the root cause of it. So if they came to you, what does menstruality coaching actually entail? It's what practically, like what does that look like?
So usually how I would work with people is to take them on this kind of journey of relearning who they are through their menstruality. So in the same way that that's what happened with me and with my Red School training, there's certain aspects in education that we need to sort of know, first of all, like the foundations. So, for example, people would come and then I put them on this sort of course that we have. And then the course is sort of material that they will read or listen to or watch in their own time. And there'll be an exercise that will really sort of help them to engage with the work, usually something like a guided meditation or a journaling thing or something else that kind of helps them to really deepen into it. And then we meet on one-to-one, and that's where I will analyze what's been going on for them in their cycle and how their cycle's been showing up for them in the time between the sessions. And then we will go deeper onto the work and kind of take them through how that actually relates to them and their individual situation. And what tends to happen is that whether it's someone that we're working with over, sort of 12 weeks, or some people do it monthly because it kind of then gives them the chance to see how it plays out in their cycle that next month. It just becomes this sort of process of relearning what's going on and having context to that, and then also applying it into your life. So it can be very, very practical with planning your life and putting in boundaries and seeing how, what sort of lifestyle tweaks that you need to be making to sort of change what's going to happen in the next month and prepare yourself for that period of time, no pun intended. But it also really goes into this deeper story of who we are and who we are as women and what our experiences have been like. For example, on the second sessions together, we always go back to people's first bleed. And we kind of spend some time in that space thinking about who were you at that point of time? What was life like for you when you first had your first period? Because a lot of the time, for most of us, it was either a traumatic event or a non-event, and was just sort of hushed over. And really that starting point has really had an imprint on how we relate to our cycles. And we kind of go back and kind of reaffirm our wisdom that was there actually at that time, and give ourselves the holding that we should have really had. And then there's things like there's 3 menstrual maps, for example, that we teach. And then we look at like how to deal with our inner critics when they show up in the premenstrual time. So yeah, it's a lot of working with the psychology and the psycho-spiritual energetics.
I think it's absolutely fascinating, and something that you kind of, again, when you're talking there, you kind of tweaked in my brain. It's like a lot of people, and we've all discussed this today, like kind of the period, your period is your enemy, your menstrual cycle is your enemy, without actually thinking, but my period is me. So you're fighting yourself, and there's this kind of dynamic where you're actually fighting yourself by thinking your period is something other, something outside of who you are. But actually no, it's intrinsic to who we all are as women and people who menstruate. And I think that's a really interesting, once you kind of get your head around that and go, well, why am I fighting myself? Let's kind of deep dive into that. I think it can lead you on all kinds of interesting paths of kind of self-discovery, and as we've been talking about, kind of like harnessing the energy of our kind of cyclical nature. Again, kind of harking back to talking about kind of our route as women kind of through the last century and into this century, and feminism, and kind of the world we operate in the West is very linear, as in like you get to this point and this point and this point and this point, it's all forward, forward, forward. However, we are not linear beings. And to kind of appreciate that and to acknowledge that and to work with that is really quite important. And I think it's absolutely wonderful that there is people who are, I've met with women who are absolutely exasperated with PMDD because it affects every part of your life. And the fact that there is potentially a way that you can work with your PMDD and befriend it, and therefore kind of almost release it in a way, it feels like is such a powerful thing. Thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate your time and your candidness about your experiences and the path that you've all been on. Has it been quite extraordinary, but extraordinary in a way that we all experience it. Do you know what I mean? It's not kind of, it's like you've kind of all have kind of gone, right, I need to do something about this, and this is the path you've gone on, but your knowledge and wisdom is beneficial to everyone who's watching this. We did have a couple of questions that came in from people that can't join us live, and I think you've almost answered this already, Jess. This is more kind of aimed at yourself, about kind of the impact of cycle synergy, specifically in terms of diet and exercise. And we've spoken about exercise, but what about diet? Kind of as in, how does that kind of impact our menstrual cycle, and vice versa? How does our menstrual cycle affect our diet?
Yeah, so with the diet, I mean, I don't know if many people have heard this, but protein obviously is a very important aspect in terms of it's really important for sort of the hormones, build neurotransmitters, so how we are feeling, our mood, our blood sugars. So often people I see are just not eating enough protein because they just aren't informed, okay, how much or what protein rich foods are. So as a key thing, that would be really what I would be saying throughout the cycle, as well as fats, because they're also really important for the sex hormones. But yeah, in terms of like as a cyclical thing, I think the question was, again, if we think about the seasons, when we think about the menstrual cycle, we're obviously losing blood, and if you're having a heavy period, obviously we need to be having iron-rich foods during that phase. So, the meats and if you are a meat eater, or the pulses and nuts, seeds, dried fruits, sort of things in your meals. But also, so magnesium's, is when we think about the micronutrients, so these are the small nutrients that are really important for things like hormone health. So magnesium, particularly when I think about the menstrual cycle, is important, especially when you're having some menstrual pain or cramping. And magnesium-rich foods, so the dark green leafy veg, dark chocolate, and your nuts, again, nuts and seeds. So yeah, and also energetically, we want to be thinking it's sort of the winter, so we want to be thinking warming foods, nourishing in that way. Sort of maybe stews and soups and things. So because our hormones are the lowest and we're not feeling so energized and things, it's really important to eat well, nourish in that way. And then as you move into the follicular phase in the spring, it's I focus more on okay, the gut, and adding in a little bit more diversity, as well as so you think about the colourful vegetables for the antioxidants, and also sort of the gut friendly foods and fermented foods, things like that, to be adding in that cycle, because we want that to support later on when we in the luteal phase, when we potentially having a bit more cravings and the PMS symptoms. It's if we can support the gut more there, that tends to help. And similar with the ovulatory phase, and it's suggested potentially you may feel like more like salads and smoothies and things because it's like our summer, but obviously that's just depending also the time of year. If we're in the winter, you may not be feeling like that, so it's very individual. But really, that's what focus on the gut, and seed cycling can really support that as well. And then towards the luteal phase, because actually that tends to be when our metabolism increases, so that is linked to why we tend to get a little bit more cravings as well. But yeah, really focusing again on the protein and protein-rich breakfast, particularly because there's real truth about that setting us up for the day, because if we do have, say, a higher carbohydrate breakfast, let's just say porridge with no protein, it really does set us up on a sort of a roller coaster in our blood sugars, and it's hard to, sort of stabilize them later. So that's really key, as well as because we tend to have a little bit more cravings. Things like complex carbohydrates are really, I generally say like roasted vegetables, again, maybe a bit more warmer foods. So that's sort of like, the sweet potato and the butternut squash and things that, you might want to roast in the oven with some olive oil with your dinner. And that's also really supportive. for that phase, and the things like dark chocolate and things when you're getting that craving, because it's richer in like magnesium, and things. But yeah, just as a general overview, that's how I kind of say it in a simple way. But
Thank you, Justin. I think actually that leads quite nicely onto the fact that we've all just kind of touched on our area of expertise today, that the three of you. Obviously, there's way more to kind of expand upon, and we're very lucky that all three of you are having individual online sessions in the next couple of months, and I'll put those details up on the post that will accompany this recording, and they'll also be linked through on the Moon website. So Lisa, on the 20th of February, you've got your hormonal superpower, learn the foundations of menstruality and transform your cycle. And then on the 6th of March, Izzy is Beyond the Pill, natural conception and fertility awareness. And then Jess on the 18th of March, hormonal happy, foods that sync with your cycle. So again, kind of deep diving into what we've just kind of touched upon today. You've also, all three of you unwittingly, have given me some great book suggestions for people that want to find out more, which I've been taking notes on. So again, I'll put that into the comments so people can kind of find out more about this discussion and this whole area of our menstruality and our menstrual cycles. At the top of the session, I kind of said that at the end, towards the end, would each kind of, well, not me necessarily, but you three would kind of give one takeaway point today. I know it's quite hard to, in a nutshell, to have a kind of a takeaway point, but I'd really appreciate it if you could give it a go. And then I'll put this in the comments around when we post this, just so people got a bit of a takeaway from today. So, Izzy, was there one thing that you kind of want people to really embrace and take on board from the work that you do, or from our discussion today?
Yeah, it's hard.
It is hard.
But I think from the discussion today, I'm just yeah, sitting with like the bigger picture and the fact that I feel like we're in like the history of womankind, like in this real threshold moment. And I think if you're here watching this webinar, then like you are really in that moment. And I think we all should just really appreciate that by thinking about these things and talking about these things, we're creating this ripple effect to the other women in our life, the other people in our life, but also generations to come. And especially, or maybe not especially, but if whatever your struggle is around your cycle and around your fertility, yeah, to just see that as sort of an opportunity of this like portal for such incredible transformation, that I mean, I speak as we, but like I'm so grateful to the women who just really like face up to those challenges and those struggles, which can be so huge. Like, for instance, dealing with like such incredible pain and these intense feelings of grief or loss. And I think to just remember that you're by working with those things and working through them, you're doing that for all of us. It's not just for yourself that you're doing that for. And yeah, it's a ripple effect of positive transformation for all of womankind.
That's very profound, Izzy. Thank you. No, honestly, but thank you so much. I was kind of scribbling away there. No, I mean, and you're absolutely right. Our actions in this moment now are going to have that ripple effect, and us talking now is going to have that ripple effect. And what we do in our lives is going to have ripple effect to the women that we touch directly, and then that's the exponential kind of growth of it, right? Because then those women will influence other women and girls, and you're absolutely right, and not to underestimate the power of talking in spaces like this and talking about our womanhood and our menstruality is so important. So yeah, thank you for that, Izzy. Jess, can you follow that?
If I can. I mean, mine definitely is not as profound, but that was so lovely put, Izzy. But no, I mean, honestly, if you can take away just the seasonal, looking at your menstrual cycle and the way you're approaching your exercise and eating, and obviously I'll go more into detail with that in the webinar in March. But yeah, even if you can take, because that was such a game changer for me, really, and just sort of yeah, having that bigger perspective on it, and permission to slow down. I think often it is just that permission. Yeah, you just quite soon, I believe, feel the effects of that. So I think that's my my one takeaway.
Thank you, Jess. And Lisa.
So I'm going to quote Wild Power for my takeaway, because really it's something that was like one of the most sort of affirmative and empowering things that I read when doing that book, and it always stays with me, and I always quote it to clients, is that the bigger the symptom, the louder the roar. And really that is all about this idea of what I said earlier, that actually if you are struggling in this way, just take comfort in the idea that actually you are really, really powerful, and you're probably likely to be this high intuitive, even touching on to an extreme scale, like almost like a psychic, a real ability to feel. And that is something that is to be celebrated and to be, sort of looked into and brought out of you, rather than seeing this as something that is wrong with you, and that it's something that's sort of attacking you and is broken about your cycle, whereas actually there's a lot there that actually could be brought out. And the bigger the symptom, the louder the roar.
Thank you, Lisa. And I think my takeaway from today is something that feels like it's trotted out a lot at the moment, but knowledge is power. And by having an understanding of our bodies and our cycles, we can really harness that, as you've all touched upon today, and use it to our benefit. And also, we don't have to, I mean, it's hard living in our Western society. We do have to conform in certain ways. Well, we don't have to, but I mean, we tend to, because we need to live our lives alongside other people. But there is a different way. And again, kind of going back to what you were saying, Izzy, about this ripple effect, if we start talking about this other way, and this kind of, we are potentially at this threshold of history in terms of humanity and womankind, but we just need to keep talking about it and spreading the word, and we can cause this kind of ripple effect around us, and hopefully, I mean, at least you haven't even spoken about this, about your Red Rebel Collective, which is amazing. But you can talk about that more in your kind of on one-to-one. But kind of this rebellion, the rebellion kind of starts here in a way, and it doesn't have to be. Well, it can be shouting and screaming and stamping our feet, but it doesn't have to be. It's also the subtler ways of us just having conversations and talking to one another honestly about our experiences. So I think that's quite a nice way to wrap up today. Thank you so much, Izzy, Jess, Lisa. I really appreciate your time today. Those of you watching, if you look at the comments that accompany this video, I'll give you more information about the one-to-one online sessions that are going on, and also the titles and authors of the books that have been mentioned today, if you want to do a bit more of a deep dive into your cycle and people's thoughts and their knowledge and their wisdom around it. Again, thank you so much, all three of you. I'm going to stop the recording now, and thank you again for joining us those of you who are watching.